Hi, my name is Jim Redder. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you guys today. I'm the author of a book called Anatomy of a Scandal, and I'd like to start off, if I may, by just telling you how I came to get involved with the book. My inspiration was Rush Limbaugh. I started listening to him in roughly '92, and I took him very seriously. I thought he was a serious opinion maker. I thought he was worthy of being looked at and taken seriously. But as I got involved with the book, it broadened into a wider look at the different players involved in what has been a really remarkable experience we've had these last 6-7 years. What I decided I was going to do when I wrote this book was not come out with a what I call a fairly typical partisan diatribe. I intended to look at the facts and find out who these people are that have been making these charges having to do with Bill Clinton, and are they true? And I promise you, I decided to look at the facts and let the facts go where they went. I did not want to do what I consider to be rather shocking practice in journalism these days, which is where you go into a subject or a topic with your mind made up, and anything that does not support that view you throw out. So I'm just trying to tell you that I'm a swell guy, and I thought I was, going to approach this in a really intelligent and credible manner. But what I found particularly disturbing was the lack of any kind of historical context for what's going on. It seemed to me, starting back in basically '93, when a lot of these so-called scandals started coming out, that there was a hysterical tone and nature about them. It was as if these things had happened for the first time, and there was no context for them. And as I started my book, I opened it with the first sex scandal that the country had. It involved Alexander Hamilton, who was then Secretary of the Treasury. George Washington was president. A man by the name of James Callender came out with a book, and in the book he accused Hamilton of having an affair with a woman that was not his wife. Gossip, tongues wagged, no big deal in particular. But what Callender had done that really was quite brilliant was he accused Hamilton of using public monies to support his mistress. Now, all of a sudden, the press had a right to know. This went from being something other than just gossip as to something that needed to be investigated, and Hamilton was put in at a very awkward position. His professional credibility, his political career was on the line unless he could clear this up. So what he did was he wrote a pamphlet, and in the pamphlet he admitted to the affair. He went on to show that, however, the monies that he had spent, in point of fact to the woman's husband, a man named James Reynolds, was his money, and none of it had ever come from the public treasury. In so doing, he went from being an accused adulterer to a confessed one, and lived to give witness to the first political reality for the country, which is that when it comes to sex and politics, honesty is not a good career move. It devastated his wife and family. It shocked his supporters. And basically his rising star never gained the ascent that it would have otherwise had. It would come to light, however, that this man, James Callender, who was in fact, we'd call him now a sleaze artist, the country's first sleaze artist. Callender was in fact being subsidized by Hamilton's arch enemy, Thomas Jefferson. This was not known at the time, and it really came about much later. But the point being that there was a second political reality that needed to be looked at, which is that if you're going to hire a sleaze artist to say something, keep him happy. Because if you don't, he can cause you no end of trouble, which is exactly what happened. The worm turned, Jefferson became president, and Callender wanted a job. Jefferson did not give him one. Callender became the source that Jefferson was having an affair with one of his slaves, whose name was Sally Hemings, and had fathered some children by her. He was the source for that. So you can see that this vicious cycle here has started, but that none of this is new when we look at what we're going through right now with things. I can only tell you that the whole story of this Callender, Jefferson, Hamilton situation, there's much more than I could go into right now. But the pattern had been set, and it was a moral also that could be given, which is that you can talk issues till the cows come home. But when it comes to winning an election, nothing works better than a little well-placed sleaze. After all, Jefferson had become president and did not in his lifetime suffer consequences for what was going on at that time. Which brings us to the question of Alexander Hamilton and his role in this. I mean, here was a man who was at the height of his political power. One day into his office, a young woman, her name was Maria Reynolds, came telling a tale of woe, saying that her husband had abandoned her, she had no money, she needed to get to New York, and things. And Hamilton, obviously something was touched. He stopped by her hotel on the way home that evening and never made it home. It was, to say the very least, reckless. And when the husband approached Hamilton and said, basically, give me some money and I'll go away, what we would call hush money these days, he complied. I mean, when we think of Alexander Hamilton, and I must tell you, this man was a giant of the Founding Fathers. We owe him more than many of our presidents, to say the very least. But you can see what I'm getting at here, which is that in his case, he had what could be easily considered to be a flaw. He was reckless, and at the same time, he was still a giant and a very important man for this country. Which brings us kind of up to what's going on now. I thread this story throughout the book because I think the parallels are quite remarkable. And there's one thing that keeps cropping up, which is to say, there's generally, when it comes to someone making a claim like this, there's generally some money behind it. And if you can find out who's coming up with the money, you can find out some very interesting things. But which brings us up to Bill Clinton and what's gone on with him. Again, as I looked at the charges that have been leveled and made against him, you know, it's, again, in our century, this is not the first time salacious charges have been made. When FDR was president, what became the modern day right wing was formed. They formed something called the Liberty League. And the Liberty League was an all-out assault to counter what was going on with FDR and his proposals. FDR were at that time in the midst of a depression, and the conservatives, the right wing, had a chance to go out and say what it is they stood for, how they would deal with this problem, and so forth. And their answer, and this was with people whose last names were DuPont and Crystal, but anyway, they came up with their program, and as far as the depression went, they said it was natural. With unemployment at 25%, they said it was simply the market making an adjustment, and it would be worse to interfere with it than with anything else. They also added something which was called at the time social Darwinism, which is that if you're poor, if circumstances aren't exactly going your way, it's really your fault. Because with social Darwinism, those who get a lot of money and succeed are the ones who are having their efforts rewarded. Well, not surprisingly, this didn't go over real well. But it was a chance for them to put forward a philosophy. What they really stood for was two things: rolling back the social programs that FDR had come out with, and tax cuts for the rich. This was the bottom line with what they stood for at the time. Well, because it was not going over well, they turned to another tactic. And that tactic was a personal attack. They no longer regarded the New Deal as simply bad policy. They regarded it as immoral. FDR was accused of not being a misguided president with bad policies, but with being a dictator, of usurping the Constitution. And they threw all of these things in with this kind of couched in this morality, and resorted to personal attack on both FDR. Interestingly enough, Eleanor was more savaged than FDR in this attack. And the reason seemed to be because she was viewed as being more liberal than her husband, as well as having a lot of influence. So this is some background, and what it seems to me we have today as we look around at this assault and so forth that has gone on with Bill Clinton. It seems to me it's being led by people who are in fact sons of the Liberty League, because many of their fathers, as it turned out, were part of this movement and so forth. Which raises the question having to do with this hatred that one detects when it comes to Bill Clinton from certain quarters. It is so very personal and things, and the question then becomes legitimately why? Why is this going on, and what is this all about? And I thought about this, and it seems to me that when the Republicans confronted the candidacy of Bill Clinton in '92, what they were facing was a not your typical Democrat. This was someone who supported the death penalty, who supported welfare reform, who was in fact a self-avowed member of the center, and said the party had to go to the center to be it. And again, it boiled down to this. With Clinton's background coming from Hope, Arkansas, going through Yale, Oxford, when they looked at Clinton, it seems they faced a cross between JFK and Gomer Pyle. And the problem with that is, when you think about it, is that that could translate into popularity. And with popularity, you get trust. And with trust, you could get something like universal health care passed. The very heart of the assault against Bill Clinton really started from, I believe, this premise and the fear that he could, in fact, get health care passed. This was his first major initiative, as we all know. And it went from there. But, you know, the irony is that there are people who were leading members of this assault, and it certainly goes in different levels. You have talk show hosts, and again, as I said, I started with Rush Limbaugh. I don't know about you, but I would not like to have myself put under a microscope for 3 hours a day, and he is one of many, as you know, but this is a rather benign level of as far as things go. It gets much more serious. Late '93, a series of charges started coming out having to do with the troopers, a story. It would culminate in Paula Jones. And what has come to light as these things have been looked at is, and I disagree with what the First Lady characterized it as, a vast right-wing conspiracy. I do not find it in any way a vast right-wing conspiracy. It's a relative handful of people, a very well-financed group of people, but it's a small group. The fact that the Republican Party has signed on to them is a problem. But within the different scandals that came out, there are two that stand out as being very dark, to say the least. One was Vince Foster. This man was, there is a man whose name everyone at this point should know because of his importance in what has gone on, and that is a man by the name of Richard Mellon Scaife. He is a wealthy man from Philadelphia who has, by and large, financed and underwritten any number of these causes and claims against Clinton. But his low point clearly is his determination to prove that there was something unseemly happening with Vince Foster's suicide. This thing has been so investigated and up and down the line. It's remarkable that it has any legs to it at all, but it was a very important thing. The other one is something that Jerry Falwell was distributing, and it was a videotape called The Clinton Chronicles. In The Clinton Chronicles, everything in the world was leveled against Bill Clinton, not the least of which is that he was a drug-running murderer. Very, very serious charges. Paula Jones made her appearance in this videotape, and it was remarkable. Hundreds of thousands of this tape have been sold. And, but you know what? It was out there. The Vince Foster story was out there. The right-wing network was milking and going through all of these things and using them as best they could. But there was a ceiling that was reached. The Clinton Chronicles was basically ignored by the mainstream press for 18 months until 60 Minutes did an expose on it and things. But anyway, it was out there, but it was going nowhere outside of that hard right network. It wasn't until, however, two things happened. One was the Whitewater, something called Whitewater, and the other is the Paula Jones case. And in both cases, you cannot give the right wing credit nor the blame for what has happened, because it is these two events, starting with this Whitewater thing, that has given us the independent counsel Kenneth Starr. The Paula Jones case, of course, resulted in Monica Lewinsky and an incredible campaign of personal life prying. But anyway, it was the mainstream press, specifically two reporters, Jeff Gerth from the New York Times with Whitewater, and Michael Isikoff from first the Washington Post and then later on Newsweek with the Paula Jones case. These two individuals are almost single-handedly responsible for taking this out of the realm of the right wing and their efforts and kicking it into the mainstream press. I have a question for you, starting with Whitewater. This thing was all people talked about for years. 2 Senate investigations, a independent accounting firm. If you look on the internet and try to find out how many articles have been written about Whitewater, it comes to nearly 50,000 articles. And I ask you if there is anyone who can in a sentence tell me what all of this was about. I think we have some things to thank Ken Starr for, and not the least of which is the fact that in the Starr report there is no Whitewater. It simply didn't, in terms of the Clintons having done something illegal, something they could be prosecuted for, it didn't happen. But just a question. In all of those articles, what I never found was what was the money that the Clintons, if all of these lots had been sold, would have realized? If everything had gone on schedule, how much money would the Clintons have made in all of this? $1 million, $500,000, $250,000, $47,500. They took out a loan and lost $40,000. They were liable for loans of $200,000 having to do with this. And yet, you know, the question becomes, what was all of this about? This incredible attention and focus that absolutely captivated the news, the reporters, the news for all these years, not to mention the right wing. It's just gone. So one is Whitewater, but the triumph of it is that it gave us an independent counsel to look in to all of this, and this could not have happened without the reporting of the New York Times and Jeff Gerth and their clarion call to have an independent counsel look into this. The other one is the Paula Jones case. When Bill Clinton is accused of lying under oath, he's accused of lying under oath in a deposition having to do with the Paula Jones case. This is very important in the scheme of things. And when you stop to realize that with the Paula Jones case, this went to the Supreme Court. This was treated as something absolutely seriously. And I can tell you this, when Paula came out, filed her claim, made her charges, it had gone nowhere again in this instance until Michael Isikoff took it seriously. He went down and spoke, or well, he spoke to her when she was at a meeting in Washington. He interviewed 2 of her friends and was convinced she was telling the truth. And it was on the basis of this that so much of what has happened has happened. And at the same time, I would ask a couple of questions having to do with that. But before I get into the story about Paula Jones and her claim, there was one other lady who started things off in many ways, and that is Gennifer Flowers. I'm sure everyone has heard, I'm sure you've seen her. She came out with the claim in '92, in February of '92 in Star Magazine. claiming a 12-year affair with Bill Clinton. From her claim in Star Magazine to her appearances on Larry King for a full hour, Gennifer Flowers has gone from a tabloid to a conclusion without passing through scrutiny. And I can tell you, again, when I started to look at these things, you start with that because all of the jokes, all of the right that reporters have, that stand-up comics had to make jokes about Bill Clinton's private life started from this woman and her claim. So I looked at it. And if I may, I'd like to tell you what I thought was the most amazing thing I found out in looking at this. Her claim was made in Star Magazine. She had a witness to the affair, a woman by the name of Lauren Kirk, who was described in Star Magazine as Jennifer's best friend and roommate for 10 years. This is while the two of them they lived in Dallas. Jennifer lived in Dallas throughout most of the 80s. And Lauren Kirk was interviewed, and she said, yes, they were having an affair, Clinton Flowers. He would come to Dallas, she'd be so excited, and so forth, so forth. This was compelling. I mean, this was hard to get around. But there's a problem. Come to find out, Lauren Kirk has never seen, met, or spoken to Bill Clinton. She claims that Jennifer used to tape men and blackmail them. Further, she claims that she, being Flowers, set up Bill Clinton like a military campaign. But that's not the best part. The best part is Lauren Kirk, Gennifer Flowers' best friend and roommate for 10 years, self-identified in Star Magazine as a man. Better than that, it appears that Lauren is a drag queen. What I find as I get into all of this was we get into a situation where the credibility of these witnesses really seriously needs to be examined, because had Gennifer Flowers' claim been made later into the primaries in '92, by all accounts that would have been the end of Bill Clinton's candidacy. Well, perhaps, it should have been. But the point is, how do you go about assessing the credibility of these witnesses? What the mainstream press did was basically ignore it. She was out there, she made her claim, and it was left alone, with a few exceptions. Very few reporters really looked in to see if this was true. Jennifer has gone on to these various shows, and she will offer the fact that she was given a state job as proof that they had an affair. This is something Michael Isikoff, in his book, which is just coming out this week, cites as an example. Well, I looked into that claim. And what I found out is it's helpful if you do a little math. For example, Flowers, by her account, said the affair ended in '89. Well, she didn't get the job until '91. So in terms of it being a quid pro quo, there was no, you understand, transfer of affections at that point. The worst that could have been said, that he was helping a friend. But that was never made clear. I interviewed the man who hired her. And there are some things you should know about the way she's characterized. Isikoff, in his book, and Jennifer always refers to herself as a saloon singer or a cabaret singer, meaning that, she just didn't have the withal and everything to, really have this state job. Well, what was never mentioned in the same time was Flowers' resume was really quite solid. She had been a reporter for the local NBC affiliate in Little Rock. She had her own business. She'd had college. She hadn't graduated, but she'd gone to college. But beyond that, there was something else that in her own book, Jennifer doesn't mention, and that's the fact that she held 2 state jobs before this one. And for this job that she did get, she had to have a merit test. And it took her 10 months to get this particular job, which paid the magnificent sum of $17,500. Maybe you can see, but the point is some payoff. You know what I mean? I mean, if you can look at it, you know, up or you can look at it down, but the point is the case could be made as the man who hired her, a man by the name of Randy Wright, made to me, and he said, look, she wasn't even the first one I offered the job to. And he dismissed all the men who were candidates because the office was predominantly women and things, and he was quite taken with Jennifer and her presence. So there are ways to, I mean, I don't think it is fair to characterize Flowers as a former saloon singer, when in fact one of her former state jobs, which has never been brought up before, was that she was the private secretary to a man who was the deputy director for the Department of Finance in Arkansas, a man by the name of John Hale, who happens to be the brother of David Hale. And if any of you are following the Whitewater, you know that's the primary accuser against Bill Clinton. John Hale, I hasten to add, is deceased, and I make no accusation of anything untoward. I believe that he was a fine and a much beloved civil servant that had nothing to do with his brother's problems. But anyway, there was just more there. Another thing that comes out when you look at Jennifer Flowers are the tapes. Well, the Star magazine printed and offered an audio cassette of these tapes, totaling 8 minutes. Well, there are 62 minutes of tapes. Only 8 was ever transcribed and made available to the press. I spoke to the then editor for Star magazine and asked about that, and he said, well, it's because I picked out the juiciest stuff. There wasn't anything else on the rest of it. Well, that's not the way Jennifer characterized what was left. I got a hold of the tapes and listened to them, and it's remarkable when you put the things that are put into context. For example, there was always the accusation that the tapes had been doctored. Well, on these unedited tapes, Flowers mentions in passing that she owns a company with 2 other people that does radio jingles. Well, it would seem to me that would take audio equipment, wouldn't it? No one has ever explored that or asked who the other people were and what that was all about. But the point being, we have a case where this person is readily accepted on talk shows. She is unchallenged. And we have a major reporter involved in this, in the person of Michael Isikoff, who will go over the same material I've just gone over with you and reach an entirely different conclusion. I would welcome the opportunity to sit down and talk to Michael Isikoff about this, because in my mind, I got to tell you, that a schlepper like me could come up with some of this stuff, but I don't understand how the same conclusions and the same material can be gone over and not dealt with. The problem and the way a lot of the mainstream press deal with a situation like this is they simply ignore it. They simply don't mention it. So you don't know this background, you don't know these other things going on, and I think it's quite appalling. I call it lap journalism. And I call it that because that's where someone is offered the exclusive to someone's story. They basically go sit on their lap and come back and tell the story the person told, whether it is Paula Jones, whether it is Jim McDougall telling Jeff Gerth about Whitewater, and so forth. But the other thing I'd just like to touch on briefly has to do with the Paula Jones case and her claim and the importance that this has played. Paula has 3 parts to her claim that something on May 8th, 1991 happened in this hotel room. You all know what the claim is and things, but what her claim is of 3 things: job discrimination, that she witnessed something called distinguishing characteristics, and that she suffered emotional distress as a result of this encounter. And if you just look at these 3 things, the way I told you I tried to look at Jennifer Flowers and her claim, starting with the job discrimination. The claim was made, it sounded serious. Paula was saying that she had refused Bill Clinton's advances and was suffering in the workplace. Serious. The problem was, it wasn't true. Her employment files showed that she got every merit pay, every raise she could possibly get. She didn't suffer, in other words. When this was pointed out to her, her attorney at the time, a man by the name of John Whitehead, said that he had spoken to her, and what had happened was, while she wasn't denied raises, she didn't get flowers on Secretary's Day. Serious. And I thought, as I learned about this, I thought that was interesting, so I called the woman by the name of Clydine Pennington, who was Paula's superior. And I asked her about this, and she was flabbergasted. She said, well, to begin with, the flowers come from my pocket. They're not something that the state was supplying, number one. She had no recollection of Paula ever being denied this at all. But if you have to try to imagine Paula making this claim, you have to imagine on Secretary's Day, Bill Clinton talking to Clydine Pennington, the boss, and saying something like, all right, give her the raise, but no flowers. You see what I mean? This is really actually a scenario that I guess we're supposed to accept. The second thing had to do with distinguishing characteristics. Now, this is about as tasteless as you can possibly get, but I'll try to keep it no worse than what you would hear on a monologue with Jay Leno or an interview of Barbara Walters. But the point being, Paula made this claim. This was her offer of proof. She held a press conference, and she held up an envelope. And the envelope said, I have this condition. Well, the condition was revealed. And the condition was revealed to be something called Peyronie's disease. Paula's spokesperson, Susan Carpenter McMillan, would go on TV shows. And this subject of this would come up, the offer of proof. She would hold up her finger and then go like this. Get the picture? So this is what Peyronie's disease is. Well, I don't know when the last time you heard that term mentioned, but it's gone. And it hasn't been mentioned since Jennifer Flowers was deposed by the Jones lawyers in December. For 6 hours, they sat and asked Jennifer Flowers all manner of questions. Now, we know one thing. We know that, according to Clinton, he's admitted to at least a one-time encounter. Jennifer, many more. The point is, they have knowledge, so to speak. the question becomes, why wasn't it ever brought up? Why didn't the Jones lawyers ask Gennifer Flowers this question? And I can tell you the answer is because Gennifer Flowers, the day before she was deposed, was asked this question by a reporter, and she denied any condition existed. Well, Michael Isikoff, in looking at this, came up to the, he had spoken to Paula's second set of lawyers from the Rutherford Institute. And in the notes in the back of dealing with this topic, he said what happened was that the lawyers for Jones were chagrined to discover that the condition is episodic and curable. This, he concluded, was why it was not mentioned, why it was never brought up, and then why Jones might have seen it one way, so to speak, and other words, not have been there later on. Well, I called a urologist, and I asked him, I gave him the background on this. I said, here's what it is. I said, can you tell me, is Peyronie's disease episodic? We all know. And curable. He said, well, it is curable through surgery. I don't want to think about it. But it is curable. But the other thing is it episodic? And he said, well, maybe to lawyers and reporters, but for the rest of us, if you got it, you got it. So again, I come back to, why did Isikoff reach that conclusion, number one, and why did was he never curious as to why the Flowers wasn't asked or the others? But I can tell you, it is, it's an amazing situation. The only thing that I think that has pulled this country through this has in fact been the American public. They have simply not reacted the way elements in the right wing and the mainstream press felt you should have treated this revelation. And I think for that we can be glad. The question I keep coming back to is, again, having to do with the mainstream press. It is, you just can't continue to blame the right wing for so much of this, because what we do is we rely on information. This is what this is all about. And when we rely on our reporters and our media to sort through these different things and give us some historical perspective and context. And if they don't, we're lost. And this is where I think the real failure in all of this that has gone on has been. And I think in conclusion, I would just say, from president to ordinary citizen, I think we deserve better. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I think you have to go to the microphone. If anyone else has any, why don't you just get ready?
My question has to do with the astounding lack of critical thinking by the press.
Oh, I thought you were going to say me.
No. No.
Okay.
You're an example of someone who has gone through a process of using critical thinking, and I know some of us had a conversation yesterday about sound bites and how people just are taking general information. I just guess I'd like you to comment on the lack of critical thinking out there and why more is not being raised about that issue.
Yes, well, all I can say is I think it's a collapse of mainstream journalism. And now, having gone down this road as far as they've gone with this stuff that's going on, I don't see that they seem incapable of correcting themselves. I will say that. I will tell you I have learned something, and that is the smartest people in this country are these journalists and these talking heads on television and radio. They know the answer for everything. If we can only get them into office, this country will have no problems. Yes?
You raised the issue of the concern about Clinton because his first agenda was universal health care. And I wonder, have you found any underlying money that's gone to some of these organizations, like, say, from the insurance company? Have you done an investigation as to where some of this funding might come from?
Well, I go into that in considerable detail in the book. You know, it is the insurance company's right and these other ones under the existing laws to finance a campaign. They were not happy. Their reasons may well have been very sound. But it's interesting the way the politics entered into all of this. Bob Dole was quoted at one point as saying, when it came to universal health care, that it may be good for the country, but I'm not sure it's good for the party. And I think that says a lot. I'm not sure we were served well by the way the debate was handled in the press in that whole health care situation. Yes?
Do you think that the right wing, not the vast one, but the people that are responsible for this in part, now they say that they're going to withdraw and that the cause is lost? Do you think that we can trust them to keep their word?
No. No, certainly not. There's a couple of ways of viewing this. Some people will say, well, the fact that the public hasn't bought this and that only 30% of people wanted impeachment, wanted these other things. Well, the other way to look at that is that's a real triumph. That's a very angry 30%. That's a 30% that is writing checks and keeping their base energized and things. That's about 67 million people. That's not to be dismissed. But in all of this, I can tell you, it's been brilliant, I think, on the part of much of what the right wing has done, because they've been able to control an agenda and decide and determine and have us talking about things like I'm just talking about. And what my conclusion in all of this is that when it comes to Whitewater and the Paula Jones case, based on the facts that I think were apparent from the very beginning, they will go down in history as the two biggest hoaxes this country has ever experienced. And yes. Okay. Well, I thank you very much. Oh, one more? Okay.
Just following up on your last point about the Paula Jones case, Clinton having to settle it finally, wouldn't you agree or disagree that he must have the most terrible legal counsel? I mean considering all the facts, that you unearthed, doing your research.
Well, again, I don't want to do the very thing I've just accused the press of doing, which is, in hindsight, being the smartest person alive. I certainly was not privy to, the behind-the-scenes machinations that went back and forth with that case. But I will tell you the sheer fact, as I said, that elements in the mainstream press took this case so very seriously and said it was important. And things, I wish it had gone to trial so that we could have seen exactly what it was we were talking about. Excuse me? Well, yes, that's a very good point, and that's a legitimate point. My question, okay, if I may, because you're not at the mic, let me just repeat your question. You had a point about perjury and the president committing perjury. It is true. When Bill Clinton was asked about his sex life, he lied. My question and my point is that he shouldn't have been asked that question in the first place. The point being that it's one thing to say that Clinton was the first president to lie under oath about his sex life. The other point is he was the first president to ever be asked about it under oath. And I feel that was appalling. I don't think it should have happened. I will tell you this, if Michael Isikoff, for example, and reporters like him delving into personal lives of presidents were reporting during John Kennedy's presidency, there's no way he would have survived and things. But I want you to remember this. Who was it in 1960 that John Kennedy was running against? Richard Nixon. I will tell you something else. The defining moment in this century when it comes to nuclear weapons and the dangers of nuclear war was, of course, the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think we may well all be here today because John Kennedy was in office at that time. And I'm offended that journalists, for example, and some moralists have decided they will now decide for us who's fit and unfit to be president by asking questions that I don't think should be asked. Yes.
I want to say that I'm very proud of the majority of the American people for being able to see through what has happened to Clinton in the last number of years of his presidency. And the reason I'm proud of them is because the reporters never asked the questions that they should have been asking, according to what you have related. They seem to want to support the House managers in their hatred of Clinton.
Well, that may well be. If I can just tell you a little thing that happened to me, sort of along that line. When my book came out, I had come out with something having to do with the timeline of the day in question with Paula Jones and Bill Clinton at the Excelsior Hotel. And I looked at the state troopers filing. Later on, I got his deposition, and it was confirmed and things, but it had to do with the fact that Paula said what happened in the afternoon at 2:30. And I discovered that Clinton was there in the morning, but left for a function back at the governor's mansion. So the question became, did he return? And I was not able to find people to support that and things. Well, Time magazine picked up on that, and they checked it out, and they printed an article about it, and it got a lot of coverage. Jay Leno made a joke about it in his monologue. He said, you know, there's a new book out called Anatomy of a Scandal, in which it shows that Clinton wasn't even at the hotel at 2:30 in the afternoon when Jones claims he was. And he said, when Clinton was told this, he said, well, who the hell did I expose myself to then? But the point being that a lot of this got covered and things. Not one reporter called me to ask what this was about, because if what I found out was true, it went to the heart of her claim, with the exception of Matt Drudge. Matt Drudge and his show called me, asked what it was about. He invited me on his show, which I did, his TV show, on Fox, and the great irony is I've been treated more fairly by Matt Drudge than by Newsweek. Go figure.
I have another question I wanted to mention. Why was it that no reporter ever asked why did Paula Jones make a big case against Clinton? I should have thought it would have been the Star that she should have wanted
American
to.
Spectator, there's no answer for that. Susan Carpenter McMillan was asked that question, and she said, frankly, I don't know. It is bizarre, to say the least. Well, thank you very much.
Okay?